I am here today with the one and only Walter Bingham. He's turning 101 in January. He's a Holocaust survivor. He is the oldest working journalist in the world. Guinness Book of Record holder. He's a recipient of the Medal of Valor, two Medals of Valor. And we are here speaking to him about the similarities between what he experienced in Nazi Germany before the Holocaust and what's happening on world city streets today. Walter, you have lived an extraordinary life and you continue to live an extraordinary life. And every one of the chapters of your life deserve an interview. But today I want to focus on something very specific. And we spoke about 2 weeks ago and you said something that really startled me. And what you said was this: I have seen everything that's happening now. I've seen it before. I have lived through these times before. And you are probably one of the very few people on this earth that can make that statement. You've experienced and seen so much. You've lost so much, that you are one of the very few people who can say what we're seeing today with Jews being hunted on the streets of Europe and worse possibly, Jews being blamed for their own persecution. You've seen this before and you know what this is a sign of.
Absolutely true. But before I answer you that, I want to greet all the Christian people who listen to this around the world. And I want to say how wonderful it is that we have the support of so many Christians, because after all, this is the Holy Land where, as you say, your Savior was born. So thank you very much.
Walter, I want us to start at the beginning. I want to put this in context. You were not born Walter Bingham. You were born Wolfgang Billich, Karlsruhe, Germany, 1924. You're old enough to remember Hitler's rise to power. You're old enough to remember how it started. You share with us?
Well, about the name, first of all, that was just because I was in the British Army 4 years, and when you in the army and you go into battle, you may be taken prisoner, and a British soldier was told, if you get taken prisoner, you give your name, rank, and number. Well, if I had given my German-sounding name, then they would have been quiet further, and I probably wouldn't have been treated like an ordinary prisoner of war. So that's why the change of name. Yes, I was born in Germany, and I went to school 3 years before Hitler came to power. So I started school at age 6, and Hitler came to power when I was 9. So in 1933. So, of course, I grew up with this. There was always antisemitism below the surface, as there's everywhere, it seems today. When I went to school, the first 3 years, I was one of the boys. And if we kicked the ball around in the schoolyard, then I got my share. And then Hitler came to power, and then everything changed. Because you have to remember that the children I went to school with, they were boys. There was no Jewish school in my town. They were the children of their parents were the ones who voted for Hitler. So they were indoctrinated from home already. They do nothing else. And then they got to school when Hitler came to power, and everything changed. Straight away, I suppose, the teachers had their various briefs and instructions, and then they were indoctrinated at school as well. And also, they had to go to Hitler Youth. If your father or mother were employed in the state or the town or even some companies, they insisted you might have lost your job if you didn't send your child to the Hitler Youth. Well, once they were in the Hitler Youth, which is one of these paramilitary organization, it was all structured like the army with the same kind of insignia, because they were going to be the soldiers of the future. Hitler's idea was to bring up an army and go and capture the East. And of course, back to World War One, where there were so many unemployed after World War One because the Allies took away the industry to themselves. No industry, there was no work. And then there were the disillusioned German soldiers who came back from the front. There were 6 million unemployed, and I don't know how many. The population was 55, 60. So a very high percentage of unemployed. And these guys stood around on the street corners and doing nothing. And then Hitler gave them uniforms, chap boots, and suddenly they were somebody. From being depressed coming back from the war. And they became the SA, the brown shirts, who did the dirty work for them, for Hitler, when they went around hitting and fighting Jews and so on. So that was a very tough time in all chase, and in my school, I never got the ball anymore. And then those children who were, as I said, indoctrinated, they hit me and did all kinds of things. I mean, I went to the teacher and said, look what Fritz did to me. The teacher didn't react. So what does that mean? That means you never do with me what they like, and they did. And so if you talk about bullying at school today, forget it. What the Jewish children went through was far worse. And then, of course, I wanted to learn, and I was trying to raise my finger when the teacher asked a question. I may have been wrong. I'm not saying that I was right, but I'm trying to answer it like everybody else. And I was never called anymore. The reason? You cannot see that the Jew knows something. That the Jew knows the right answer. Sitting next to a boy, we were sitting 2 by 2, and he was copying from me, as one does at Jew, and he got good marks, and I got bad marks, and he copied my work. Then there came a point when they decided they can no longer expect an Aryan, a German boy sitting next to a filthy, dirty, stinking Jew. They said, you have to sit in the back of the class. So I went to the back of the class. Now, what does that show? What does that? That's a sign. What does that show? That I'm not like them and they to do with me what I am. So I'm sitting in the back of the class. But I had to go. I had to be there. And sometime later, the school management in the town decided that you can, I'm putting that in my terms, that you can no longer expect these German Aryan boys to breathe in the air in the classroom that the Jew breathes out. And I was kicked out. School finished.
And you were the only Jewish.
Sometimes there were 2 of us, and sometimes there was 1 in the class. And that's more or less how it was. And we were kicked out. And so I was out of school for maybe a year. And then the Jewish organizations in the town went to the school management people and said, can you not give us a place for our children, to educate our children? Well, they did. They found what was the most dilapidated old school building that there was. And they gave us that. But interesting that it's been pulled down now. It was that dilapidated that it's the only school building that's by now doesn't exist anymore. But even though they segregated us, they did something else. Children who needed remedial teaching, they were also not worth to be helped, because they wanted to have those clever best race and all that race theory. And they were also at that school. They occupied half that school building. But we were still Jews, so we were segregated. The schoolyard was segregated. So we went to school there.
While this is happening at school, what's happening on the streets? What's happening in the media? What's happening in shops? What's happening in society?
Well, the media was out controlled. It was all the Nazi media. What's happening in the shops and in the establishments was signs everywhere and written in letters that looked like Hebrew but were normal letters. You've seen those maybe. And it says, Juden unerwünscht, Jews not wanted here. You could, at that point, a Jew could no longer go into a cinema, a swimming pool, anywhere, a restaurant. That was all prohibited. That's what happened. That's what happened in the streets. Jews were totally prohibited from doing anything. We lived our Jewish life at home. You wouldn't go in the streets at that time anymore, and I can imagine. I don't admit that the very Orthodox Jew in their special clothing may not have worn that anymore because they would immediately be targets for attack.
So hiding Jewish identity.
Yeah, you hide your Jewish identity. Well, my parents, my father was a what they called compositor in the printing industry. He would put he was working below the newspaper, and then of course he got thrown out of his job. And my mother was a housewife at that point. Once you got thrown out of work, now you have to do something. So they both took agencies for, I think it was for the bidding, things like that, with samples, and they went in the not too far away in the villages and the little towns and taking orders for this thing. So they made some kind of a living doing that. You had to do that. And came across some friendly people also. But it was tough. It was tough. And now where else will we go? It was a tough life, and it got worse. In the sort of what I experienced was a slow strangulation of Jewish life, slowly, like today. Today, I can see it. I mean, they don't like Jews in going to certain shops, and they have demonstrations, and then there was a newspaper which was dedicated totally to antisemitism. It was called the Stürmer, and it was edited and issued. It belonged to a man called Julius Streicher, who was the Gauleiter of Bavaria. And when you look at it, everything was the Jew. The Jews are our misfortune. Every village, every small village had there a glass case standing in the square where this weekly paper was displayed. So that everybody could see that anti-Semitic paper. And you on the box, on the case, where such inscription like the Jews are a misfortune, those who buy from Jews are traitors. That's what we were looked at, and that paper promoted that. And so if you didn't subscribe to it, you read it every week in the glass box that's displayed. And those are, and funny, the caricatures of Jews looked exactly like Yasser Arafat, with heavy lips, and I can see the caricature and I can see Yasser Arafat. So then and of course Jews. Then they invented stories about Jews, sexual misconduct and all that kind of thing. And then it came at one point. Oh, yeah. Every year there was a big rally in a city called Nuremberg, where the Hitler would speak and the new policy would be declared. There were hundreds of thousands. There were hundreds of thousands of Nazism flags in the speech square. The tribune was specially built by my God Speer, and Hitler came from the end, and it took him 10 minutes or more to walk through the ranks to get to the tribune. That's how big it was in the Nuremberg rally. In 1935 was another rally, and the theme of speech in the policy was race laws, the race laws, so that the Jews, that the race against the Jews and others, and let me give you an example of one or two other things in those race laws. First of all, you could no longer associate with any Jews. If you were married, you were strongly encouraged to get divorced. If you had a friendship, relationship, you had to break it off straight away, or the Jew will go to where take pleasure or something. Government, but the things here, I'm saying, if you had a friendship with a Jew, it was called, the German term was called Rassenschande, race disgrace. But if the relationship was more intimate, it was called Blutschande, blood disgrace. And of course, if you didn't split that immediately, then the woman would be branded as a war for Jews. Is a name, the name they had for these women. Jews something. Jews couldn't have a car, couldn't have a fur coat, couldn't have anything. That was all in I've got a long list of things that Jews could no longer do or have, animals and all kinds of things. That was the 1935 race laws. And it also described who is a Jew, who is a quarter Jew, who is a half Jew. When you married and you go, if you have one grandparent Jewish, what category are you in? What are you allowed to do? And if you have on one side two grandparents, if you have two Jewish grandparents, you have normally four. Then you're in a different category and so on. And right up to when you are an Aryan, a full Jew on one side, four dots, and no dots at all, then you were at that period.
How delightfully systematic. Walter, now what I hear is it started off slowly. It started off with, okay, this is not nice, but this is our country, so what are we going to do? It got progressively worse, until the end.
Yes, people always thought, at the very beginning when he was elected, there were people who thought he was a crackpot. And they said, well, let's see what he does. We're going all the way back now, and I did better. Let's see what he does, and then we can vote him out again. Well, the minute he got into power, the first thing he did, he burned down the building of the parliament. Now, how did that happen? They didn't want the parliament anymore. So they put the blame on a feeble-minded Dutchman called Van der Lubbe, whom they found in the area or in the building or something, and they put the blame on Van der Lubbe, who was subsequently executed. And he was a communist. Now the idea of the Nazis was fighting communism as well, expanding to the east, okay? And so they had, in one go, they could turn against the communists who burned down the parliament. And that's how they did it. For a very short time, there was parliament in the upper house or something, but that all stopped. So what he did, he dismantled democracy. There was no longer those democratic rights, and subsequently, slowly he introduced this his way and no other. And of course, the Jews were always the scapegoats.
Indeed.
Always the scapegoat. We had to, where everything that happened was the Jewish. Look, the First World War was the fault of the Jews. Okay. The big inflation in 1920-something, 26, I have to look it up. In 1926, that was all it, there was an inflation that was so big that my father told me he went to buy socks, and when he found a sock he wanted, by the time he found the matching one in the box, the price had gone up, and people walked around with suitcases of money. I have a 100 milliard note here, and a milliard is billions, 100 billion notes. But they printed the money that they lent in enormous numbers. And the big inflation was also organized by the Jews to make money.
And I'm going to pick up on that, see, because, but okay, before we continue on that, and I do want to continue on that, I want to speak about what we see today. Jews, again, being hunted on the streets of Amsterdam and Paris and Montreal. It sounds very much like 1930s.
It's exactly the same. That is what I said, I think, at the beginning. Or you said it. I saw it all, and I know today what's more or less what they're going to do with the next stage. What's that? And there's only one good thing. We have the state of Israel, and a final solution, a Holocaust, will never happen because we are strong. Israel is much stronger than anybody thinks. We have a lot in reserve that hasn't been seen yet. And I'm not talking about atomic weapons because we never said we had atomic weapons. But what is happening today in the cities of the world is exactly the same. And the progression is the same. You get mobs. You had the mobs in Amsterdam walking, looking for Jews to beat up. And that's what we saw. That's why we didn't show we were Jewish. We kept our religion in our home and our synagogues until so long as the synagogues still stood, and we might come to that. And people, and if they know you, they would shout, "Sau Jude, Sig Jude, Jude," Jude verrecken, you know what that term means? Perish, Jews perish, and all that done. What we saw, what we see today. And I don't want to go into contemporary politics here, but our neighbors' attitude to us is what they learned from the Nazis.
Right, correct.
No?
Another thing that I see is absolutely a parallel, and this is actually from the pages of history. It continues to happen generation after generation. The Jews being blamed for their own persecution. Oh, you started the First World War, the big inflation. But now it's no longer the Jews, it's Israel, the Jewish state.
Well, that's an excuse, of course. Anti-Zionism is nothing else but antisemitism. It's just a new way of being anti-Semitic. So you say, no, we're not anti-Semitic. Because as I said, laws in different countries. No, we're not. We're not against the Jews. We are against the Zionists in Israel. It's one and the same thing. It's connected. And of course, then contemporary politics says we have no right here. Well, you as believing Christians know as well as we do what our rights is in this land.
How would you define Zionism? Because no one is an anti-Semite, of course not. That's politically incorrect. We're just against Zionism. So what is Zionism?
Zionism is a desire of the Jewish people to return to their homeland. It became a political movement started by Theodor Herzl in 1800 or something. It became a political movement which was taken over subsequently by Chaim Weizmann. Mm-hmm. And it's just the yearning of the Jewish people to return to their ancient homeland.
So basically the belief that the Jewish people is at home in Israel, that the Jewish people have a right to self-determination here in their own country, which means you're a Zionist, I'm a Zionist, you're probably a Zionist.
Isn't there a movement, Christian Zionism?
Correct. But more than that, it means God is a Zionist. Because he's the original Zionist. He gave this land to the Jewish people over and over and over again. Walter, so what we see in Germany with the Jews being blamed over and over for their own demise, with the Jews being blamed for pogroms. Again, now, Israel, because of so-called genocide in Gaza, you can expect Jewish people to be persecuted. And we think it's all very groundbreaking and different. No.
Well, after the war, after World War, many Jews returned to Poland to find their property. And there's one very famous case in a place called Kielce, the Kielce pogrom. When Jews went back to Kielce to look for their property, then the local population after the war, Poland, killed them. This is the infamous Kielce pogrom. So we had after the war and the Holocaust, which shocked a lot of people, we had a few years of respite. And then it started again.
It's almost...
I think that's the pattern.
It's almost like the world had a little bit of a fright. Ooh, this is bad. Let's reframe. But it was always there.
The world began suddenly to have a conscience when we heard of the atrocities. Well, today you hear of the same atrocities, and the world and the United Nations and don't see it that way.
Unfortunately, I feel like the truth is out there. If you want to look for the truth, it's there. But the war against Hamas, the war against Hezbollah in Lebanon, almost became an excuse for that ancient hatred to rise up and rear its ugly head again. Now, Walter, we spoke about it, the fact that there's one difference between then and now, and that's the fact that Israel exists. And our neighbor said to me the other day on Holocaust Memorial Day that she's a teacher and her children asked her in the class, when did the Holocaust end? And she said, well, there's a date, but for me, the Holocaust didn't end until 1948, when Israel was established. And I think all of us, we see it, but we aren't Jewish, so it doesn't really resonate. What does having a state mean to you as a Holocaust survivor?
It means everything. It means I feel safe here, and I feel happy, and this is my home, and I consider myself just Israeli. What other things that happen politically in the world, I have to deal with it in my profession, but it doesn't affect me much. I'm here, and it means I have a home now. Finally. There were occasions when I should have been here earlier, but this is a long story. But I'm here and I'm home, and that means I'm safe. I wouldn't want to go anywhere else. I wouldn't want to leave the country for long. I must tell you, in Germany I had no roots, obviously, no roots. Then I came to England, and for very many reasons that would take us another interview, I didn't feel that I had roots in England, although I lived there 64 years, including 4 years as a British soldier. So now that I live in Jerusalem, and I like to go out just traveling, but after 8 days, this city, Jerusalem, is like a magnet for me. I have to come back. It pulls me back. That is the proof that finally I have roots here, because I belong here.
What would you say to people who go out into the streets and demonstrate anti-Israel demonstrations, anti-Zionist demonstrations, under a thin veneer of antisemitism? If you could address all of them today, what would you say?
Educate yourself. You are ignorant because you are copying each other. This is the crowd mentality. You following each other. It's what probably it's with it today. You're with it if you are in this crowd, and you follow it, and you have something to think about, but you don't really know anything. I feel that there are very many of the young demonstrators, or maybe even older ones in the world, who, when you ask them, what is the name of the river you're talking about, they probably can't tell you. They have these phrases from the river to the sea. I'm not sure if they know that the sea is the Mediterranean, or where exactly is and its history and its neighbors, and I have often dreamed, talked to myself and said, what would I do? I'd like to address them if they let me, and say, look, I don't blame you. You don't know. Nobody told you, but the fact is that, for instance, the so-called West Bank, that you call it the occupied West Bank, that it was actually for 16 years occupied by the Jordanians, who, when the British left the country and left it to the Jews to establish a state, at that point the Jordanians marched in without any justification, and actually occupied the West Bank. And until we threw them out. 16 years they were there. Nobody said, you're occupying the country.
And did they offer the Palestinians a state? In their 16 years there, did they offer them?
They never did, and there was no talk. There was not a talk about the Palestinian state until 1964, when the Egyptian Yasser Arafat started this national movement. There were Syrians before, in many cases, and as to Palestine, which was a name that the Romans, I think, gave it Palestine or something. There are people, Jews, who were before the state born here, and the passport says born in Palestine. Palestinian Jews were Palestinian. Palestine was this for a long time. Had this name, but Jews were also Palestinians. They have in the passport. Golda Meir, who used to be one of the early prime ministers here, she says, I was a Palestinian until the state came and called me Israeli.
Walter, now not long after the 1935 rally, things got progressively worse, which leads us into a defining moment, Kristallnacht.
Yeah, well, why did Kristallnacht happen on that particular day, in the early mornings of the night, from the 9th to the 10th? The reason, interestingly, goes back to March 1938, when the Germans took over Austria, the Anschluss. Now, Austria is in the south, of course, and very close to what was Ukraine and Poland, Polish areas. And there lived very many Polish Jews lived in Austria. When the Germans took over Austria, the Polish government got frightened, got worried that all those Polish Jews will now want to come home to Poland. We don't want them. So, after a while, and you need to remember the timeline, after a while they issued a denationalization law which stipulated that all Poles who live outside the country for 5 years or more need to validate their passports and get a stamp in their passport. When the Polish Jews went to the consulates, they were refused. Like that. All. So now overnight, all those Jews became stateless. You have to remember that even in 1938, the official policy of the Nazis was not mass extermination yet. It was get rid of the Jews, out, out, out. Now they're stateless. You can do nothing with people who have no passport. Stateless. And now the Germans thought, oh my goodness, now we have all those extra Jews from there on our plate to deal with. And we don't want that. So on October the 28th, 1938, so we did starting in March, and then we have the nationalization law. And then on the 28th of October 1938, the Nazis decided to forcefully deport all those Polish Jews to Poland.
That included you.
It depended on the local Nazi whether they took women or men, or women and men, and boys or girls. That was up to the local Nazi. So they deported the Polish Jews forcefully, and they got them to the Polish border. The German name at that border town was Benchen, the Polish name was Spongin. And the Poles didn't want to let them in, and the Germans argued with the Poles for 3 nights. So that wretched mass of Jews was in no man's land for about 3 nights. Now you can imagine what that meant. Among those Jews was a family from the German city of Hanover called Grünspan. Grünspans had a son, 17-year-old Herschel, who lived illegally in Paris. the post between France and Poland and France was good in 1938. Herschel's sister, Bertha, wrote to him in Paris of the terrible ordeal that they went through. So he got this communication about what terrible ordeal his parents and sister went through. He got very upset, got himself a pistol, and went to the German embassy, asked to see the ambassador. Well, that's not so easy. So anyway, they took it, they brought him in to the third secretary, a man called Ernst von Rath. When Herschel faced Ernst von Rath, he drew the policeman, shot him. And we're talking here from this is a timeline, very important, we're talking October 1938. Ernst von Rath died of his wounds. Now, I have to say that the Nazi organization had a communication system, maybe they were called Fernschreiber in those days, of something like fax, but old-fashioned, that every Nazi organization in all their territories had. So they could send out a message and it went immediately everywhere. They had already instructions of what to do when they get the signal, and the instructions were to do this terrible Kristallnacht, to burn synagogues and all. When Ernst von Rath died, immediately a signal went out, and that was the trigger for Kristallnacht, the night on which all synagogues in Nazi-occupied areas, which was Austria and parts of Czechoslovakia and Germany, all synagogues were destroyed, burned or tried to destroy. 30,000 Jewish men were taken on that day to concentration camps. 7,500, I think, Jewish properties were damaged or more. And that was then called Kristallnacht, Reichskristallnacht, because of the broken glass crystal. And there are, I believe, 2 synagogues in the area that were untouched. I don't know the second, can't remember the second one, but the first one is the Seitenstetten Temple in Vienna. That is one of the very large synagogues in Vienna, and it had a very narrow entrance and was big inside, and it was so built between buildings, close to buildings, that they did not dare to set it alight. And it's today an active synagogue. That's a dinner.
Walter, before we go on, I want to go back to that wretched mass of Jews stuck between the Polish border and the German border. One of them, it was your father.
Yes, that is so. In my town, I ought to say that what I'm saying now I know because my mother, thank God, survived the labor camps. There were 2 types of camps, labor camps and extermination camps, and she was a strong woman, and she survived the labor, and she could tell me the story that they came, and because we were actually Polish. Anyway, my father was also deported to Spongy, and subsequently got into the Warsaw ghetto where he perished. Now my mother tells me, when they came to fetch him, they said, "You have a boy," because in my town apparently they took boys. "You have a boy, where is he?" Now I was in another town in a school. There was a double town where there was a Jewish school, and my parents sent me there for the year, and I was out of town. And they said, "You have a boy, where is he?" And she said, "Oh, they're both gone out somewhere." Had I been at home, I would not be sitting here today. I would have perished by the side of my father. So, very good. In fact, all my life, I can add that, I had this very multifaceted and difficult sometimes life. And I was protected by the good Lord from the beginning, as I told you, from the beginning when the Nazis came to the very end, via the whole period of the Nazi occupation, via that period, my 4 years in the British Army, came out unscathed. Then trying to make a living after coming out of the army. We had no help. Like today, they help veterans, they help people. In those days, they gave me a coat and a suit and a pair of shoes and said goodbye when they released me from the army. And then I had to make a living for many years in England to try and get on my feet. Finally, I'm here, and the good Lord has protected me all the way from the beginning to today.
And next January you will be?
101. If God gives me that long, I will be 101. And when I was 100, I didn't have a party because it was middle of the beginning of the war. I said in my articles in the magazine, and I said it in my radio programs. What can you give a man who can't even read of 101 for his 101st birthday? So I decided that all I want is as a birthday present for the 101 hostages to greet them here at home. That's my birthday wish.
Walter, my last question to you. What would you say to people out there, Christians, who support Israel, how can they make their voices heard? How can they let Israelis like you know that they're out there, that you're not alone?
Well, there are wonderful organizations like Bridges for Peace and other organizations. Then there are very many groups that come here for shorter periods, come here for 3 months or half a year, and want to show that they believe in the history and the Judeo-Christian history, and they come and help in old age homes and that kind of thing. I've often asked them when I spoke to groups like that, and I asked them, what did your great-grand or great-grandfather, did they tell you something? But they never spoke about it. But and thank you very much. There's many Christian groups. We need you. We need you because you are the people who tell the world what you see here. You're witnesses to the presence, and you can correct when you go home, when you come and visit us, and you see that how we live and that we are just nice people who want to be left alone in our own country. And then you tell the world, this is what you are ambassadors for Israel when you go home. And that is, I find that very important, because the Christian constituency in the world is very large. There are, unfortunately, some who don't believe exactly as you do, but you had the opportunity to tell them, to educate them, and you're doing a wonderful job. And I'm happy you're here. Elie Wiesel, Holocaust survivor, who also became a very famous author, said, if you listen to a witness, you yourself become the witness. So that makes all you nice people out there witnesses to what I said, and you have to go on and pass the information on.
Ladies and gentlemen, Walter Bingham, from the mouth and the heart of a Holocaust survivor who's seen this all before, who's lived through it. You are the ambassadors. You speak out on behalf of Israel. So use your voice. Speak out. Speak truth from the city of the great King. Shalom.
Shalom.